I'm Tori Petry, joined by Twentyman and Mike O'Hara virtually here to break down all that happened in the 2020 virtual NFL draft. We're going to talk about the Lions draft picks. Gentlemen, welcome in. Thank you so much for joining us. First off, I just want to get your quick thoughts on what you thought of the whole process of the draft being virtual this year. Tim, we'll start with you.
Well, I think kudos to the NFL for first off, pulling it off without a hitch. And then, a special thanks too to, the networks, ESPN, the NFL network, and all those people that were involved that worked so hard to kind of, bring those 3 days into our homes. I thought everyone involved did a terrific job. I thought being able to kind of get a glimpse into, the prospect situation there at home and look inside of, some of the coaches' homes and the GMs and the kids and some of the stuff that went with that. I just think it was a terrific 3 days all together. And I wouldn't be surprised if the NFL kind of implements some of this stuff moving forward. I don't know what exactly that'll look like, but I think a lot of people enjoyed it, and I could see some elements of this moving forward.
I heard somebody on ESPN on Monday morning said that this was Roger Goodell's finest hour. And I think when he sent out that memo 5 or 6 or 7 weeks ago outlining what they were going to do and warning the teams and the executives, we don't want anybody complaining, just be quiet, do your job. There'll be severe penalties for anybody who, criticizes or whatever. And I thought he was right. I think absolutely. And like you said, you have to be prepared. Football is the ultimate adaptation game. You talk about changes at halftime and all that. Well, this is the biggest change in the history, but probably the most wide-sweeping change in major sports in history. The way they did it, I thought it came off great. It was so good. I was talking to somebody today and said, "God, wouldn't it be great if they did this every year?" And then I thought, wait a minute, what made it special is it was one time only. So let's just leave it the way it was. And I agree with Tim. There'll be some things that they can take from this and go forward and implement them, but I'm not exactly sure what it would be.
Sure. Tim, you mentioned the kids being involved. I wonder, did Connor get to have a little behind the scenes look into what your draft process is like?
Yeah, he did. Connor, my 12-year-old son. I think he got a bit of appreciation of how long I work on draft day. Especially Saturday. That's a long day. That starts at noon. The draft isn't over till 7, and then you've got Bob Quinn afterward, and you're writing off that, and it's just some long days. And so I think you got a little bit of an appreciation of that, and I think he listened in on some of the conference calls with the players too, and was texting some of his friends. I think maybe bragging a little bit that he got a chance to listen in on some of those guys because we talked to, as you know, Tori, every guy after the pick, and so yeah, he enjoyed it. It was good to see him get a look at what Dad does for a living.
I love it. It all makes sense now. Now that's why Dad gets home so late after the draft. Let's dive into talking about all of these picks. There's so much to talk about. We got to start with round one. The Lions take Jeff Okudah at pick number 3. Mike, what did you think of the selection of Okudah?
Well, first of all, it's staring you right in the face. He was the best cornerback on the draft by far, one of the 4 or 5 best players, period. And maybe behind Chase Young, the number 2 defensive player. Some people might like Derek Brooks. Some people might like Isaiah Simmons of Clemson. But I liked Okudah. I did 5 mock drafts, and one was one of those dream drafts. It's never going to come true where somehow or other Chase Young ends up in Detroit at number 3. But I liked Okudah. I like the kid. I like the way he plays. A lot of people thought he might have, because he didn't start until his 3rd year at Ohio State. He was a 3-year player, but he really had extended playing time in year 2. In fact, he was like in the top 8 in tackles, led the team, tied for the team lead in passes defense as a 2nd-year player. So he got plenty of playing time, and then he put it together with just a terrific 3rd season. I thought he was the right pick for the Detroit Lions, even if they traded down to 5 or 6 or maybe even 7. I thought they could get him there maybe, but I think they did the right thing, held firm, and drafted the guy they wanted and drafted the guy they needed.
Well, I don't think running back was at the very top of the list that most pundits were talking about that the Lions needed in this draft, but that's what they take in round 2 when they draft DeAndre Swift out of Georgia. Tim, what did you think of that selection?
Well, I think it was a situation where he was the top guy on the board. And look, if you look at what Bob Quinn and the Lions have done leading into this draft, I mean, look, they're serious about wanting to run the football and being more balanced on offense. This was a Lions team when Matthew Stafford was under quarterback. Look, they were the 6th best passing team in the league. But they want more balance. They need more balance. I mean, since Matthew Stafford has been, drafted in 2009, the Lions have never been higher than 17th in the league in running the ball. And so in Swift, you got a guy who was a back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher in the SEC. He's got some burst. Look at that. You can see some shake and some playmaking ability from the highlights on the screen right now. And, I just think he fits what the Detroit Lions want to do, and that's run the football more, be more balanced. I think he joins Kerryon Johnson. He joins Bo Scarborough. They drafted Jason Huntley a little bit later in the draft. We'll probably touch on him in a little bit. And, I think when you look at that Detroit Lions backfield now, it's diverse. You've got a lot of different guys, and there's terrific competition. And, even going back to the signing of Big V in free agency, he's going to play right tackle probably. Look, he was the 8th best run blocking tackle in football last year. They went and got 2 guards that we're probably going to talk about here in a little bit. Some guys that are known to be nasty in the run game. And so now you add DeAndre Swift, a guy who can catch the ball in the backfield, do a lot of different things for you. I think it was very, very clear that Bob Quinn, Matt Patricia, and this football team wants to be better running the football. I think DeAndre Swift helps them do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that is a great point you bring up. Those 2 guards that the Lions took, Jonah Jackson and Logan Stenberg. Mike, obviously, we saw them take 2 running backs, 2 offensive linemen. I think that does speak to the intention to run the football and have a solid run game there. What did you make of them going with 2 offensive guards in the 3rd and 4th rounds?
Well, I didn't expect it. I thought they would get a guard somewhere, and then right around the middle rounds. I'm not, if 3rd round, I consider that a middle round pick. And just to add on to what Tim said about giving Matthew Stafford some running backs, look, give him some running backs, not running backwards. We've had enough of that, okay? And I think building depth in the running game and at running back is the right way to go. I really like Jonah Jackson from Ohio State. Look, the kid played 4 years at Rutgers, which is a Big Ten school, but certainly doesn't play like a Big Ten team. But he said he played his 5th year at Ohio State. He transferred because he wanted to get the feel of what it was like playing big time games, meaningful games, and competing for championships and getting the ring and the gold pants and all that you get at Ohio State. And mission accomplished for him. Look, in 4 years at Rutgers, he played in 11 winning games, played in 13 at Ohio State. And so I thought that really told you about his character and his desire to really play at the highest level against the highest level of competition and with the highest level of competition. So I thought that was a terrific pick. The next kid, Logan Stenberg, we'll find out. I like what he said at his press conference. People ask him, what's your style of play? He said, I'm nasty. Well, so are the guys you're going to be playing against in the National Football League, and they're veteran nasty. But I like his attitude. I like the way he comes from a run-oriented offense in Kentucky. You really have to solidify that interior offensive line. The Detroit Lions already have a Pro Bowl, All-Pro caliber center in Frank Ragnow. We'll see how these other people put the puzzle together, put the pieces together on the interior. But I think it's a good, solid move.
And I will say, just on a personal level, I talked to the day 1 and day 2 picks on video chat after they were drafted. And Jonah Jackson was one of my favorites to talk to. He just had so much energy. He was ready to run through a wall that night he was drafted. He said he could play a football game right now. If you haven't watched that interview yet, go on DetroitLions.com and watch that. He certainly has an infectious personality, and you'll be able to see that in that interview. Also in the 3rd round, the Lions selected a guy that Lions fans are probably familiar with his brother, at least. His brother, Romeo Okwara, already plays on the Lions defensive line, and now Julian Okwara out of Notre Dame will be joining them. Pretty cool, Tim, to see a pair of brothers on this defensive line.
Yeah, you know what? And good for Julian getting some free rent there. Romeo signed that contract extension. He got a little dough in that deal, and Julian doubled down. We talked to him at the combine, and he, joked, I'm going to sleep on, Big Brother's couch and live rent free. And we talked to him after he was selected, and he said, look, I wasn't joking. I'm staying there. He's paying for rent. I'm on my rookie deal. But how fun for those two. Obviously, that's something they probably dreamed of growing up, playing football in the backyard. But in terms of Julian, the player, you look at the Lions are getting somebody that can rush the quarterback off the edge. He's got terrific length. He's got long arms. He's lengthy. He's got some bend and some twitch to him. Look, he had 12 and a half tackles for Notre Dame as a junior, and unfortunately broke his leg last year, wasn't able to finish the season. Now, he's certainly not a finished product by no stretch of the imagination. I think he's got to fine-tune some stuff technique-wise. He's got to get a little bit stronger, to kind of hold that edge a little bit better in the NFL. But as you're seeing right there, he can get off the edge, and he can rush the quarterback. He uses those long arms really, really well, and I think he gives the line some versatility too. I think he could stand up and rush, and I think he could put his hand in the dirt and play kind of from that traditional 4-3 look. So, I think the Lions wanted to get a guy that could, rush the quarterback out of this draft. And I think Julian fell a little bit because of the broken leg. I think if he doesn't break his leg, he's probably not sitting there in the third round. And so I think it was a value pick, a need pick. And, we'll kind of see when he gets here what he can do, but he should be able to help them off the edge.
Tim, what do you think of the depth that they added there, and did they do enough on the defensive line in the draft?
Yeah, I think, Tori, when you're talking about the third day of the draft, you're talking about either guys that fit scheme-wise or guys that fit skill-wise. When I look at Vincini, obviously that's a scheme fit. I think he's kind of a two-gap, hold up blocks kind of guy, lets linebackers flow in behind him. And then when you're talking about Cornell, he's a guy that can play inside, outside. Matt Patricia and the Lions, value guys that are versatile. He did both at Ohio State, and he had a terrific senior season there last year. And I think that put him on the radar. Bob Quinn said after the draft that, look, Ohio State is so good of a program, has so many players. And when he was watching, the Jeff Okudas and all the other guys that he was evaluating in this draft, he just kept seeing this, Cornell guy stand out and decided to do a lot more work on him, and they liked what they saw. And so, I think they're guys that add depth to that defensive line. Look, we'll see if they're good enough to stick on the roster. It's going to be tough for a lot of these late round draft picks and undrafted free agent guys, because there's likely not going to be a spring. So look, they're going to have to hit the ground running when and if football gets back going, in July and August. And so, but I think just from an evaluation standpoint, watching the film, look at them, I think they're guys that can add depth to that defensive line.
All right, the two that we have not talked about yet, we're out of the 5th round, a wide receiver and a running back, Jason Huntley and Quintez Cephas. Lions took both those guys in the 5th round. Couple of weapons for Darrell Bevell's offense. Mike, what did you think of those two players?
I'll talk about the big slow guy. Is that okay? Kind of fits me. No, Quintez Cephas, when I first saw the draft, the first thing you do is start looking at bios and all that. And I see this 4.73 40 and I go, oh my God, why'd they get him? He can't run. I started to do a little bit more research, in fact, a lot more. And I look back and the first thing I thought about was Anquan Boldin. Let's look it up. In 2003, Anquan Boldin was timed in 4.73 seconds in the 40-yard dash. Now, Cephas, in his pro day, ran 4.62, which still isn't great. But look back to Anquan Boldin. He played 14 years in the National Football League, caught 1,060-some passes, 9th most in the history of the league. At the age of 36, in his 14th year, he caught 67 passes for the Detroit Lions. His last season in pro football. I think speed is overrated at certain times, and it certainly seems to be with this kid, because at the Combine, Jeff Okuda was asked, who is the toughest receiver you faced? And he said, Quintez Cephas of Wisconsin. Tough, a great route runner, great strong hands, great catch radius. All of that, it's good enough for me. Now, it's all my research is great, and what Okuda said is great. He's got to prove it on the playing field, but he'll get his chance. The moral of the story is, don't judge a player just on his 40 time.
All right. Well, we have judged just about every player in this draft class. We've talked about each and every one of them. Let's judge the draft class as a whole. Really hard to do that as these players have not played a snap yet. A lot of guys, have come out and said something like, maybe this could be Bob Quinn's best draft yet. He was asked to comment on that after the draft, and his response was, there's no way to say that yet. I respect the question, but there's no way to say how this draft will turn out. But just initial thoughts on it. Do you think that Bob Quinn did fill the holes that were needed in this draft? What do you make of the entire draft class as a whole? Tim, you go ahead.
Well, I appreciate all the people that do the grades right after the draft and all that stuff. But look, you don't know about these guys until 3 years. I think 3 years is how you have to give these guys. And but just to kind of evaluate it off the cuff here, seeing the class as a whole, they filled some needs. Obviously, I think Okuda was a no-brainer. They had traded away Darius Slay. They needed to, replenish that defensive back room, that cornerback room, and they got the best one in the draft. And so, look, I think they got 5 offensive players and 4 defensive players. I think if you're Darrell Bevell, you've got to love what they did in this draft. I think they helped you up front. They helped your run game. They added a receiver who Mike talked about in Cephas, who I think's going to have a chance, to contribute on this football team early on. And they got Matthew Stafford weapons. I think Darrell Bevell's a huge winner out of this draft. And then defensively, we talked about the depth along the defensive line, but I think they got an edge rusher that's going to help them. They got a cornerback that's going to help them. And so, look, when I look at the draft, I think it was a draft that filled some positions of need with some really terrific talent. And I think the one thing Bob Quinn said is, how do I evaluate a draft, or when do I know if I got a good draft class? Well, if it's these guys come in and contribute, and that doesn't always have to be a starter, though you got to think, Swift is going to be a starting caliber player, Okuda obviously, but guys that can come in, make plays, and be contributors and do it early. And I think that's how we'll evaluate this class, is when we go back and see the stats at the end of the year. How many snaps did these guys play? How many tackles did they make? How many sacks and interceptions and touchdowns and carries? And so I think the hope is that a lot of these guys can contribute right away and help this football team win more than 3 games.
Mike, do you think holes were filled with this draft?
Yeah, I really do. And I think, I think the running back, DeAndre Swift, fills more holes than you might think, because not only does he add to the running game, but if you can run the ball, you can take time off the clock, you can close out games, and he gives you depth that they did not have at that position. Look, you're going to have 4 running backs. That's great. But doesn't mean you have depth. You might have one good one and 3, just guys. Well, I think he gives you strong depth, interchangeable starting caliber running back at the top with him and Kerryon Johnson. The rest of it, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention. They got 3 guys coming back from last year who missed half the season or more, and that would be Matthew Stafford, it'd be Kerryon Johnson, it'd be Deshaun Hand. You put those are guys who are coming back. If you expect them to be healthy, they're going to give you a full season of work, and I think that upgrades everything. Now, look, I think you always want more when the draft is over. I think Bob Quinn would go, God, if I only could have, but some guy might have gotten taken just ahead of him, and it sort of adjusts your board and you react to it. But I think overall, it's a good, strong draft. I've seen, I go through that stuff like everybody else, and I see that you get A-, B+, B, and all that. It seems to be a consensus around the National Football League among the people who cover pro football for a living that the Lions came out pretty well. And Tim, I just want to tell you, for the 30 years I covered the Lions for the Detroit News, I gave them grades. Okay, I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Hey, we got to have something to talk about now that the draft is over and we don't have other sports. I mean, the next best thing is giving out draft grades.
Yeah,
so
Mike, how often were you right on those grades, though? How often were you right? That's the big question. I want to see all 30 years. Let's evaluate that.
Well, first of all, I can't remember, but second of all, I'll tell you what, I was right and sometimes they were wrong.
Oh, that's how it goes. That's definitely how it goes. All right, guys, thank you so much for weighing in on this year's draft. We appreciate your insight. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Stay tuned to DetroitLions.com because we have much more coming for you as the offseason rolls on.